Now, moving ahead to Teams. Now, Teams continues to be a huge focus of innovation, obviously, and there's a lot of announcements around Teams in the context of Teams that we can definitely touch on today. Again, I'm only scraping the surface here, but these are the top ones that really caught my attention.
2Lead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 Intranet and Digital Workplace?
Now, one of them, of course, is Teams Connect, and we've been waiting for this for a while. So when I say Teams Connect, think of shared channels. We've been talking about this for a little while, but we're seeing a lot more of the visual experience, and that tells us that we're getting a lot closer here. Now, they're telling us that this should be available in public preview in Q1 of 2022, so that's not too far off. And really where this fits in is working across organizations or across tenants, which today is a little bit challenging. If you're working with partners, you're working with clients, all of which are kind of siloed within their own Azure Active Directories, you can get invited into their tenant and participate in and collaborate with them in their team's environment, but flipping between them is a little bit painful, right? And so the whole idea with a shared channel is that instead of having to flip between tenants, just make that channel shared so that we can all see them within our own environments and collaborate a lot more easily. And obviously this is quite complex in the back end when it comes to how AD is managing this, but love that this is going to be possible, because this is going to make collaboration, especially for groups like ours that are working with dozens and dozens of different partners, to be able to kind of make that a lot more seamless going forward. So really exciting. Now, another exciting announcement was Teams Mesh. So hashtag metaverse here, Microsoft not to be left behind when it comes to the metaverse. We are seeing an announcement around Mesh, which is also driven by a recent acquisition of Altspace VR. Now, this here we're seeing is the ability to generate 2D and 3D meeting experiences with personalized avatars, and not only personalized avatars of ourselves, but also immerse those avatars in physical and digital worlds, right? So we see examples here of being able to have meetings actually in the digital world as our avatars, and still be able to work on documents or any kind of file that we would normally want to work on within the Microsoft 365 suite. So this actually brings that kind of live collaboration back that we've kind of missed out on during COVID and for other reasons, back into the realm of possibility. It does a lot of other great things for accessibility as well, because we know that some people either can't or are reluctant to participate in video conversations. And for some people, this is going to be a bridge to joining that conversation and feeling more comfortable. So we've seen this here in the video, but also kind of in some screenshots of meetings where we have people that are participating as avatars in the midst of other people actually with their video on. So there's going to be definitely looks like a blended possibility there, which is definitely interesting. But I'm curious to see how that plays out, and whether people will start to default towards avatars, or if the avatars is just going to be kind of a short-lived kind of fun thing that will eventually fade away. But nevertheless, I'm very excited about the kind of virtual experiences that will allow us to collaborate in these digital spaces. And I think we're seeing across the industry, well beyond just Microsoft, a lot of interest and buzz around this being the future of the internet itself. Some other interesting Teams announcements that will facilitate the user experience and the meeting experience. One is being able to assign roles to other people in the meeting while you're scheduling it. And this is going to be really, really helpful when you have co-presenters that you want to assign from the beginning, because you know that someone's going to be co-presenting with you, and assigning that role right as you book the meeting. Another thing, if you're like us and you're starting to make use of the raised hand feature, you might have noticed that when you have a large cohort on your call, sometimes it's hard to keep track of who you should kind of open up the conversation to first, because it wasn't clear who raised their hand first or in what order they raised their hand. And sometimes that's a bit awkward. So seeing the order in which hands were raised will be just a nice little simple addition, but I think very powerful in certain situations. And another one that I think some people have been asking for is just the ability to either pin or hide their own video. Not everyone is the same. Some of us really like to have our video pinned so that we know what we look like, and others find it very distracting to watch themselves, right? So having the ability to do either of those, depending on the person, is going to be a really great add-on, because I've heard this from a lot of people that it's very fatiguing to watch themselves. And again, sometimes to the point where you're actually kind of losing track of the conversation because you're just spending the time watching yourself and the way that you're interacting on video. So these are expected in early 2022, and these are all things that I think will be great to see in Teams. Now, one that I'm not so sure about is the chat with self feature that they announced, where basically you'll be able to send messages to yourself in Teams. And this is really, intended, and I think quite obviously it's not intended to be a real conversation. It's intended just to be a safe place to put down notes, rough ideas, things that you don't want to share necessarily with someone else. Or maybe while you're in Teams or while you're on the go, you have Teams open, an idea pops into your head, and without having to jump to another application to log that, you have an easy place to drop it just in a chat to yourself. So I like the idea. I'm curious how it's going to be used, and I'm definitely intrigued to see if, once this becomes available to myself, whether this is something I actually start using, or if I find that there's still better ways to log that information. Because I think one of the challenges I have already is that I have information in a lot of different places, notes to myself among many, right, of those issues. So if I have yet another place where I've left notes for myself, I'm concerned that I'm going to spend time stitching them together. One thing that'll be fun, I think, to see is an increase in the emoticons and being able to chat with a bit more emotion than the current very limited 6 available emojis. And I can't say how many times I've looked and wished I had a facepalm emoji reaction to put on certain messages, but maybe that's just me. But I love seeing that we'll have over 800 3D new emojis to play with. I think that really opens up the door to having a little bit more fun with Teams. And also not trying to fit our emotions into just 6 small little boxes, I think is going to be helpful. Functionally, I know many people use the delay delivery in Outlook, and I for one, definitely do that. And I love seeing that this is trickling into Teams, especially when we think about the idea of shared channels coming in and potentially more cross-enterprise, cross-corporation collaboration happening, and being a little bit more sensitive to time zones and people's working hours. I think the delay delivery fits into that very, very nicely. It allows us a way to make sure that we're still not disrupting people when they're in their off hours, and it allows us to respect that boundary. So delay delivery, it's an option right now in Outlook, and if you're not using it, I definitely recommend you have a look at it if you're in that scenario, and seeing that available in Teams just makes sense. Very related to that is easily being able to see a colleague's time zone. So you see on this slide here, I've opened a people card for Retta, and I actually see that I'm 4 hours behind her in terms of my time zone. This is a simple thing, but if you're like me and you're working with people across many, many time zones, it can be a little bit mentally taxing at times to always keep track of who you're talking to, what time zone they're in, and how that should impact your actions right at that moment. So this is going to be helpful, and it's definitely should hopefully reduce that mental burden a little bit. Q&A experience we've had in Teams, that's not necessarily new, but they did showcase during Ignite an improved experience that they say will allow us to have more structure for both open and moderated meetings and webinars. I like the experience that I'm seeing in the early visuals, and it's definitely something that I think, especially with large seminars, for example, when you're really trying to triage those questions and create some structure around them so that people see which questions have been answered, this is something that I will definitely make use of. So it looks like this will be in public preview starting in November, and hopefully in the new year we'll see this starting to roll out to everyone. Now, overall in Teams, there were a few other things, and I think one of them in this little animated GIF here is around search experience. And the search experience for me has been quite painful in Teams for quite some time. So I'm really, really glad that I'm seeing investments here in the way that search is working in Teams, because, previously or even today in your environment, you'll notice that almost none of the real estate of Teams, let alone any of the functionality that we've come to expect from Microsoft Search, is really leveraged in the Teams context. So seeing that in Teams, seeing a dedicated, messages, vertical here, people vertical, files vertical, and even some filtering embedded within that is going to be really helpful, because if we want to continue to drive people towards Teams as that kind of go-to hub for collaboration, and we'll put a caveat with Loop in the mix now, how that all will work. I think we want to continue to do that. So the search experience really, really needs to be strong. So I'm glad we're seeing these innovations coming in. Now, if you want a couple other really good assets to check out around Teams, definitely check out the shared channels video from Richard on my team. It's a great little video on some really great real life scenarios where this will be useful. And there's some great Ignite videos as well as some blogs as well. So check those out if Teams is really of high interest to you.